yeux de lumière qui voient passer au loin les oiseaux.
There is a little bit of change of what I'm going to do for the next times, meaning we have had now, I don't know, it's the third or fourth set of sessions now, and for the rest I'm planning as well, considering that you have to write an essay and that you should participate really in the meetings here. I will start with a lecture, and you will get the new lectures hopefully, and the old lectures you will get them, and you can, if you don't have them already, you can watch them on your leisure. And it is important in general studying to look for the different sources. You have lectures, you have books, you have your own notes, and you have discussions in the seminar, be it with the lecturer or amongst yourself. And all this comes together and builds unity. Meaning, do not think you can rely only on the lectures or only on the books or only on one source. It should come together. So the first part of the future meetings will be just a lecture, I think they will be more or less demanding, meaning take your notes, watch them afterwards, go through it, take again your notes, and there are simply some things you have to know. If you drive a car, you have to know that the brakes are not on the right, because if you think they are on the right, you will be accelerating and drive against the wall. Simple things you have to know, and as well more complex things, but still you have to know them. You have to sit down, you have to learn them. It's pretty boring sometimes, but it is actually not boring really when you use it at some stage. And this using it at some stage we will do during the second part of the lectures. You watched the film, hopefully. I have here some questions. And I will ask you in the second part, take one question and then work at home through the questions. Begin to write an essay, but that we at some stage then in the next time can talk about it. And law, in general, human rights law even more so, is a political exercise. Something you have to know. It's not an opinion. That some people say it's a political issue, some people say it's not a political issue. It is a political issue, whichever way you take it. Now you can have different opinions on which part is political and to which extent it is political, but it is a political instance, it is a political institute, because it is happening between different countries with different interests, with different political regimes, with different histories, and all political issues. And I said as well, law in general goes back on a political struggle between people, and I say it now in very general terms, between people who had been depending on others, not any more property like the slaves, but depending on others, depending on the feudal, on the aristocracy, and trying to get rid of this dominance of the aristocracy to be able to make business, to be economically active on their own behalf. Before, They had been economically active as well, but only on behalf of the prince, of the king, of whoever it was, this noble person. If they had been noble is another question, but they had been called nobility. There was no incentive as well to make their own business. So these economies had been very much stagnating economies, and people said, we can do better. As simple as that. It's scientific work or academic work, academic analysis is not necessarily complicated. It was very simple things. People wanted to do better than they did before. This was, of course, you can build theories around it, you have to do it, but this is the basic point. And then they said, okay, we have rights. It's not that we just want to do something more, but we want to have the right to do something more. That means you cannot, nobility, you king, you cannot forbid us to do whatever we want to do. And whatever we want to do was, of course, not whatever, but this was then laid down in broad terms in constitutions. People, the bourgeoisie to be more precise, constituted themselves as legal subject. And they could go basically to the court, and this was the trick with this legal thing, with this legislation. They could go to court and say, whatever the king, whatever the prince, whatever this nobility says is not of interest for us. It's written down here what we can do. And this is relevant, not the personal opinion of the ruler. Then you have, of course, different acts, different bylaws, and so on and so forth. A hierarchical system. Constitution means you may be able to move freely, and the bylaw says, but only with 30 miles on the street in the city. It's a hierarchy. And it starts here and not here. It doesn't say first you can drive with 30 miles per hour, and then say this, but the other way around. And constitution, it is very important, although it's usually forgotten. Constitution is a process, meaning, by and large, that people, whatever it means in concrete terms, people sit together and develop in a political process this constitution, defining what is freedom. Is freedom of speech relevant? What is the material side, the socio-economic side? What's the point if I can speak freely, but I lack the medical service that I need to survive? Yes, speak out. Say whatever you want. But unfortunately you cannot because you are sick and you will die tomorrow. Or I say the other way around. If people can speak freely, they will be able to develop medical service, health service, and. This then is a discussion, this then is another level of the political process. Now there is one, in 1866, one judge, American judge, sorry about that, but he said something kind of reverse. By the protection of the law, rights are secured, meaning the law itself secures your right. There is in law something written that says, yes, you have the right. Withdraw that protection, and they are at the mercy of wicked rulers, as in the clamor of the excited people. So it is the law you need to protect itself, actually, to protect its rights, to protect that it is applied. And this is again a complicated process between the different levels, that you have a constitution that outlines the general legislature, the general rights, whatever you have. And then it goes down to sometimes even local laws. There is one interesting thing, I don't know enough about it, but at least the basics. In London, Hyde Park, it's called Hyde Park Corner. In Hyde Park Corner, you can say whatever you want. There is no limitation. Now, in England, in Great Britain, whatever you call it, you have this freedom of speech, but you cannot say everywhere really what you want. It is somewhat limited. Only Hyde Park Corner is this place where you can stand on a podest and say whatever you want. I think there is still one limitation. You are not allowed to say anything against the Queen. Against the Queen.
Queen?
Queen.
Ah, Queen, yeah.
Queen and King are kind of specially protected.
Yeah.
You cannot say they are stupid and whatever.
Not any colorful language.
But you can say, I think there wouldn't be even you're having, I assume in England you would have the blasphemy as well, that blasphemy is protected, but I think there you can actually say, God, just forget it, it's right. So it's there you can really say everything, but then in general, and this is a bylaw, saying in Hyde Park Corner, at Hyde Park Corner you can say everything, and you have your different bylaws that say you can say everything, but not in the middle of the junction. Things like this. So you need this protection of the law by the law itself. The protection of rights by the law itself. Now, what kind of reasoning is behind laws and behind rights? From where do they come? I said there is this constitution that people are actually giving themselves a law, defining themselves rights. But from where do they come? And this is more or less a theoretical debate or a debate in political practice. Especially when it comes not to concrete laws and rights, but the general laws and rights. That the original basically is the church saying it's divine rights, divine, coming from God. Now you can take God in the Judeo-Christian tradition. You can take it as well that there is some spiritual source that defines these rights. So on the one hand, it is very much a Western tradition, a Western thinking, but you would have the same in other constituencies as well. There's this spiritual power that allows us actually to define by and large what these rights are about, from where they come. That would limit actually this subject, that it's not that I can say whatever I want in terms of you can kill your slaves, or women are of a lower order, and children don't have to say anything. In this tradition, it is divinity, it is this God, it is the spirituality that says, literally, God created, I don't know literally, but more or less, God created Adam, and Adam was not enough, so he cut out a piece of the ribs, I think, to create Eve. So that was a subordination. Women are minor. First is the male, the man, and then comes the woman. That is, in a way, this idea of a divine law suggesting this. And then I said it is this long-term history that even today, in Christian societies, you have a subordination of the women. In the 60s, or 1960s, that is about 60 years ago. So historically, I was alive.
Uh-huh.
It's my history. At that time, when I was younger, women had been owned by the men in Western countries. The man, the husband, had been able, in legal terms, to say, you won't go to work. I forbid that you have employment. Women had not been allowed for a long, long time to study at universities. And this shows the subordination going back 2,000 years and longer in terms of history. And 2,000 years is a long time. But 60 years is nothing. So these last 60 years, and you still have disadvantage of women. If you look at positions today, in many countries you would have the higher positions occupied by men, and then, of course, women can do any job, but they cannot get into the higher positions.
Mostly Muslim countries.
That's,
For example, even in Iran, they cannot play football without hijabs.
yeah. So it's going on, and I didn't engage in Iran or in Islam society because that's a different story again. Although it is basically, I think, very closely linked to as well Judeo-Christian societies. You find the same patterns there. So this is important to keep in mind. From where do the rights come? You have this position that people say it's God-given, it's a divine law, or you have the position, it's the natural law, it's given by nature. Against something where we, if we live through it more or less, are puzzled today to think about the fact that this is part of our history against something. I didn't live through it literally, but I was, I'd nearly say infected, I was living through the consequences in thinking that in the colonial times, they measured the size of the brain of people and said black people are by nature less intelligent, women as well, they are less intelligent than men and the white men because their brain is smaller.
Brain what?
The brain is smaller.
Smaller.
It's not as heavy, so they cannot think.
100 grams.
So, and I say I went through it because, in a way, because in the village where I lived, or in the small town, there was a so-called a shop for colonial commodities, for colonial goods. And they sold basically those goods that had been imported from the colonies. So in a way it was the manifestation in the 50s, 60s, yes, there are still colonies. And that was the time when actually the colonies had been fighting for their independence. And then you have we can call it historical approach, or let's say social societal approach, that you say it's negotiated. At some stage, Spartacus in person stood up and said, stop it. Slaves, okay, but as slaves we have rights. And this is what we want to have written down. And you find, in actual fact, the first laws written down in Rome, the so-called 12 tables. It was a kind of the first, today's language you would say code civil code, the first all-encompassing law that put together the different legislations from different places and said, we need one law to rule the country. And this is in the 12 tables.
What was that?
Hmm?
It was like BC?
That was around, I think, around the BC, the change
BC,
over. I'm very bad in years. But at least it's long-term history. And yeah, it was. And then you have the Justinian code later. There had been different, over history, always different attempts to bring it together in one code. Because then you have had colonies joining with different laws. You had to accommodate this. So it was always a process defining historically as well. And you needed, of course, according to technological standards, developments, you needed as well different adaptations. If you have a small country and it's growing and growing, and you have industry instead of agriculture, you need different law. And by and large, you can say everything was geared towards inclusion. Inclusion or the regulation of exclusion. Meaning it was never meant to include everybody, but at least you had to define who is excluded why. And this was the decisive thing, that with the law, with legal systems, it had not been up to the nobility, to the king. Red beard? No, just go. There was a law saying, defining in advance, it was decisive, in advance who is included, who is excluded. And there had been the odd exceptions, of course, that if you never ever saw a man with a red beard, why should you think about it to exclude or include them?
Yeah.
If you don't think it's possible even to have a man with a red beard, then you don't think it. Although law is in general, it is in general so general, the formulation that it is all, as far as possible, all encompassing. You try to include every eventuality. Even if you cannot think that there is a women with a pink beard, you think, but perhaps it could be, so let's think about it. And then there comes a woman not with a pink beard, but with a yellow beard, and then you say, I did not think about this, now I have to change the law. So inclusive, exclusive, it is going around this. And there we have had the different dimensions in terms of defining what law is, that it is on the one hand, right as being lawful, but before that actually you have something else, and that is right in terms of some kind of a moral definition, of a moral attempt. This is the right thing to do. And if it is the right thing to do, we should make a right out of it in terms of law. We should say it is not only morally right, but it is as well right in terms of you have a right to be treated in this way. You have the obligation to treat other people in this way, and you means there is a very strict definition coming up of the legal subject. Not everybody is legal subject in the complete sense. I mentioned women up to a certain point in history, children up to a certain, or even today, they are not legally fully responsible. They are responsible to some extent, children, but then you see on building sites usually parents are responsible for the behavior of the children. Because a child cannot necessarily think about everything, any consequence it has doing this and that. So there are examples, and you have this kind of limitation. And then you have a permanent struggle. I mentioned this, the struggle for law. The one dimension is actually how relevant is morality? Does it really play a role? Or what we call positive law then, shouldn't we have a law, something that is written down and that is valid? I mentioned the two dimensions, the categorical, the deontological, or the consequential. You can say there are certain categories and you should act, this is a moral standard, you should act in a way that your action, the way you act, can be the guideline for the law that is relevant for everybody. Or you have the consequential one that says, actually, whatever you do, there is no moral standard in this respect. There is another moral standard, and that is, what are the consequences? I guess we will come back to this later in the second part. At least you heard there Cicero saying, qui bono? Who is benefiting from it? Qui bono? Is it relevant, whatever the moral standards are, or is it relevant what the consequences of it are? Coming back to Kant and the axiom, is it relevant that I should not lie, I should always, I ought to say the truth? Or is it relevant that I save the life of my friend, of a stranger, or whatsoever? So you have the two different approaches there. And setting up this system of legal subjects and the standards of including, excluding, who is included and excluded, you have, if you want, as the highest aim, and this is the highest aim in terms of a compromise, equality. Hart, a famous lawyer who worked on this, said actually, if there is any natural right, it is the freedom, and that means equality. There's nothing else. It's this idea of the freedom of everybody, meaning equality, to say, to do the same thing. There is no privilege whatsoever, for whatever reason. This is the highest priority. The rest, you cannot say it is given by nature. You can deduct other things from this, from freedom, but that's basically it. And then this deduction actually is something where we come in contemporary debates, actually as well when it comes to human rights. And I mentioned it indirectly just before. You have three groups of rights, you would say, where there are different three groups of rights, but the one distinction is civil rights, meaning the people, the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie claimed we have the right to say what we want. And of course, when they said, or when they claimed this right, it was not just about claiming this right of being able to say what they wanted, but it was the right to, or the claimed right to do what they wanted. To be economically active, to say on the market, this is what we want, including 100 yuan, $1,000 or whatever, to say this is the price I charge. But it's nice to have this civil right. You need something else. Meaning you need another dimension, another layer of rights that guarantees that you have this civil right. You need political institutions. And this is not the exception at Hyde Park Corner, where everybody can stand up. Because I'm not in London, so I cannot go to London and stand at the corner, on the corner and say what I want. I want to say here what I want. What I want is regulated, meaning here I'm not allowed to talk about, I don't know, the growth of the trees, but I'm supposed to talk about law. Maybe that sometimes the growth of the trees plays a role, but this is regulated in such a way. In the parliament, I cannot, being parliamentarian, I cannot talk about the last weekend journey with my family into the mountains. I talk about a certain subject. The weekend journey in the mountain to the mountains can play a role because there I saw literally that animals are not, they don't have their natural environment, etc. But this is a limitation of what I can say. And in the parliament, I have to say certain things if I am parliamentarian. If I am minister, I have to say certain things and I have to do certain things. So you have the political rights on the second level, and it is something we all have in one way or another, depending on the system. Usually you say it's the right to vote. I was yesterday out for dinner and we came to talk about Mr. Trump.
No.
And my friend said, how is it possible that people vote for such a person? And it would be an interesting question now really to clearly define who who voted for Mr. Trump. Because if you look at the evaluation of the results, Trump doesn't really have a majority in the United States. He is elected by something like the majority, but he cannot say, apparently, the majority of the American people stands behind him. And this is the complicated electoral system that gives so many votes there and so many votes there, and it's calculated, recalculated, and at the end of the day he has more votes than somebody else. Because he doesn't get all the votes directly, it's the congressman and complicated system. And you have systems, different systems in other places as well. Political rights. But what is the point in having civil rights? You can say whatever you want, and you have the institutions you need to say whatever you want. I said before, cynically, if you are dead. If you do not have the socio-economic security, that you can say it. So it is what comes here at the third level, it's the social rights, meaning social security. Whatever this means. Again, you always have this leeway whatever it means. It can mean you have the right to work and you are obliged to work. It can mean you have social benefits. It means different things in terms of health system. Sometimes you get health services free, sometimes you don't get, you get part of it free. Education. All this plays a role here. If you have a modern political system, you have to be able to read. So it means you have to have a school that teaches you to read. As simple as that. Otherwise, the political rights don't exist. At least not for everybody. Those who have their private teacher, they have the right in political terms, but the others don't. So get people into education. And of course, you can have different approaches on different countries, but think about, and I don't say this now to say something positive about China, but think about China, this huge progress in terms of education over the last decades. And I know there are difficulties or there are disputes about human rights here in the country. Fine. But you have to see both sides. And this is discussed in the United Nations as well, that Western countries say in many cases, yeah, but you lack the rights of free speech. And then you can argue, I know somebody who says, just don't say this, because I go every year for a basic health check into my country, because here I don't get it. Here means in that case Ireland. Ireland is, in terms of human rights, being brought to the Human Rights Court, meaning in basically no country you find the situation where you say human rights 100%, there's no debate, everything is completely without problems. One reason that it is not without problems and that it cannot be without problems is about what I said before, inclusion and exclusion, in a different way. Because there are reasons to limit rights. You do not have the right to spit at me or to throw me out of the window. Now you can say, but this is limited, my freedom. I want to do this. And these rights or these limitations are, of course, not there because somebody dislikes this. But they are there especially for two reasons. And the one is the common will, the common interest, the general interest, the interest we all have. And let's suppose I'm here and doing a reasonably okay job, teaching. That's why I'm here, and teaching is the general interest. Then your particular interest is not of interest. The general interest is higher than your personal interest to throw me out of the window. Sorry about that. So there is a reason to limit the speed on the road. There is a reason for doing this, and this is the security of the overall traffic. And the other is self-protection. Lawyers are always best when they are talking stupid things and taking examples that are completely out of the world. So if you want to throw me out of the window, let's say the common weal is okay, doesn't matter, but I have to protect you, throwing me out of the window, I would actually grab your arm and you would go with me. So I have to have a law to limit your freedom, because otherwise you will go with me down on the ground floor. If you drive, if you speed drive, if you drink alcohol, drink drive, this is dangerous for you, not only for the common weal, but for you as well. So I have this law in place to protect you from yourself, if you want, or as well from others, where it may be necessary doing so. There is a fundamental problem we face, and this is one of hierarchy. And we will come back again and again to this. And this is the disputes between different countries. We have the I and the we. We have the individual who has certain interests, and we have the we have the community, the society that has a certain interest. What is more important? If you have a little child, a baby, a toddler, and you want to look for the child, you may say, actually, it is my interest to get a place in the kindergarten for the child. But you can say as well, society has an interest in getting the child into the kindergarten, because it's better cared for in the kindergarten than at home. The parents can both work, can develop them freely. It's the interest of the society that they can do so. And you always have a certain tension between these two lines. What is more important? Is it the society, the societal interest, or is it the interest of the individual? Is it the interest of the individual to go quickly from A to B, or is it the interest of society to have a safe system of road traffic? Now, in terms of law is always an intervention. Law is always an intervention. Meaning you have law, you need law when something is going wrong, when something is not self-regulating. So what are the justifications? I said something goes wrong. What what do you do if something goes wrong? You correct things. This is one justification for having an intervention by law, that you say, there are occasions where something goes wrong. People are free, are equal, but they are not equal because some come up with black skin, some come up with white skin. Some come up with being born female, some are male. In society, this means actually that they are unequal. The inequality between, look at gender pay. Women in many countries, women's income is lower than that of men. So what do? You correct it. You have mechanisms that work against this, that correct the inequality there. You have anti-discrimination laws that correct things if you are quotas are a system, for instance, that in some countries, in the United States, of course, especially because there is a special law, you have a certain quota for black people going to the university. Because black people are disadvantaged. For whatever reasons, they have the same rights, they are disadvantaged. So the universities, some universities at least say, okay, we correct this by having a quota of at least, I don't know any figure, real figure, at least 30% have to be black, have to be counted. So this would be one reason. But what is when it's too late? Meaning you are sitting in the wheelchair, and there are certain things you cannot do, or you cannot do in the same way as others. Usually you start work at 9 o'clock and work until 9 o'clock. Makes life easier to calculate. 12 hours. So, but then you say, you poor guy are sitting in the wheelchair. If you want to be there at 9 o'clock, your colleague has to leave at 8 o'clock the house, you have to leave actually at 7 o'clock. So we compensate you for this, and you get more money, or you get an additional hour you don't have to work, but you get paid, or something like this. So compensation for something that is that went wrong. And then you have another point. That is securing a certain outcome. In a way, you can go back to the quota and say, yes, I make sure that a certain diversity is there, that every group can go to university, so I have a quota for black people, for disabled people, or whatsoever. So this is a securitization, a justification of actually inequality. Formally, you disrespect basically inequality. You disrespect equality. Formally, everybody sitting in the wheelchair not has the same conditions. It's interesting then to look in law as well to language. At language, terminology around disability changed over the years or due to political reasons. Disability, what does it mean? Handicapped, what does it mean? You always say or set some standard as the norm. The norm is having two legs, standing on them, walking, and being able to walk whatever reasonably fast. This means this means ability. Now you have disability.
Not being able to do so. Not being able to do that, normal person can do.
Right, but what does it mean?
Like, not saying
Take the simple example.
Not saying human rights. Not saying human rights.
You have two legs and you can walk. What does it mean to be disabled?
Disabled means not having same human rights.
In concrete terms, two legs being able to walk. Now you are disabled.
I can't walk.
And there you come to difficult points. You cannot walk. Okay, or not okay. But what is the disability? Is the disability not being able to walk, or is the disability that there is no escalator in this building and you cannot get to the fourth floor? But the seminar is happening in the fourth floor. They won't happen in the first floor. Then I enable you again. You have this handicap. You cannot walk. There is no escalator, but at least you can take part. So it means different things. It can mean I am disabled. I lack certain abilities, or it can mean I do not have the opportunity to do with my abilities what others can do. And then you come back to compensation. I make sure, for instance, in some buildings you have this disability access. I make sure that the law says actually, you have it as well for private buildings, you get a special grant to establish, to install things you need because you are sitting in the wheelchair, because you are deaf, mute, or whatsoever. So be careful, be aware of the different dimensions of language as well. And we'll stop here now and continue then with the practical.
Blanc l'innocent, le sang du poète qui en chantant invente l'amour pour que la vie s'habille de fête et que la nuit se chauffe.